Welcome to Mark My Words. Mark My Words is the story of my journey from a place where I was shattered to where I could live again. Warning. Mental illness education and you is the lived experience stories of people affected by mental illness and may contain descriptions of depression, suicide, addiction, and or abuse. Well, g'day and welcome back to another episode of Mental Illness Education and You, or Me and You. It is my absolute joy today to welcome to the studio a gentleman, and I'm going to ask him the question, of course, that we always ask our guests. And I've forgotten to put the music up. Pretend some music is playing. It's saying, "Who are you?" G'day, Brock. I'm going to ask the question, who are you, mate?
Yeah, thanks for having me today, Mark. My name's Brock. I am a mental health educator with MEAC, and I also volunteer with an organisation called the Let Macquarie Newcastle Suicide Prevention Network, and I live with PTSD, anxiety and depression.
Now, it's important to note that you also have a full-time job. So when you say you're an advocate and you work with, you fit that amongst a whole life, yes?
Yeah, I do. I'm actually an IT consultant as well. So I contract into places and give them advice on their IT processes, policies and procedures.
Mate, there's so many places I want to go with our conversation today. You and I have spoken together in schools, but we've only recently gotten to know each other. We normally work with other people. We've been in the same orbit, but we've never had that chance to sit down and get to know each other. So you and I have a very similar diagnosis. However, the way that we came about our PTSD was very, very different. I don't want to re-traumatize you, mate, but do you mind giving the listeners an understanding of your diagnosis?
Yes, so having post-traumatic stress disorder, I had two traumatic events that occurred. The first one, I was assaulted by a group of people, and the second time I was in a very, very bad car accident, which I also get survivor's guilt from because the young gentleman driving the other car, he lost control. And my car was wrong place, wrong time, and he actually passed away. So there are times where I do question, did I do the right thing in this car accident? So,
yeah. And it's important to note, and when I heard you tell this story, it was the question that came to my mind, was you didn't do anything wrong in that car accident.
No, I was actually pretty much doing a very slow trip up a hill, and funny enough, there was two cars drag racing. A car had just lost control, nearly hit me. They turned around, kept going, and then as I went around the next bend, bang! This thing just happened in a blink of an eye, and like I say in my talks, I thought I was going to die.
Now, in this experience, you were driving along, minding your own business. You were not speeding, you weren't drinking, you were just taking a drive, you were headed somewhere like any one of us. A guy was basically, a couple of hoons were out on the road. One of them passed away. Why would you possibly feel any kind of survivor's guilt over this situation? And there might be people listening that are like, hang on, if it's not your fault, why would you have a sense of guilt around that event?
Yeah, well, I'm very open with this. I slammed on the brakes, and I turned my steering wheel left. The question was, did I go the right way? That's how it sits with the survivor's guilt side. I had that split-second decision, and it probably didn't matter. It happened so quick that I probably didn't even move that far, but I still question myself a lot, and I couldn't get to his car either. I climbed out of my own car, was damaged, and was trying to crawl to their car to try and help them out, and I couldn't get there. And I still have that moment sometimes of weakness where I go, I couldn't help him. And that's a very hard thing to live with sometimes, and I've had to do a lot of treatments to get through that traumatic event.
One thing that people don't seem to know about post-traumatic stress is one of the main contributors to the diagnosis is during an experience of near death or extreme danger or trauma, is that feeling of helplessness. It's that idea that there was nothing that you could do to alter the situation. And with that, I'd like to ask about, you mentioned it really, really briefly, but you were assaulted when you were young. And when I first heard you tell this story, when somebody says, I was assaulted, you imagine that, oh, maybe somebody punched you or pushed you or something like that. But this was a violent assault from a number of assailants. And I don't want to put words in your mouth, but you said during this experience, it was a near-death experience for you.
Yeah, it was. So it was a group of people, and I was helpless. There was times when my hands were held behind my back, and I was punched and kicked repeatedly. I was on a beach. My head was put in the sand, things like that. But the worst part of it, like the assault, I can live with. The hardest part is I had mates stand there and watch. Cowards, in my view, stood there and watched. And when I went to the police, they said they weren't there. And they're the ones who have got to live with that. I can forgive the guys who assaulted me because I was 17 at the time and they were, 18, 19. But the friends who stood there 17 years ago and still don't talk about it, they're the ones that probably hurts the most. They're supposedly friends, I
mean, that's really shocked me, because you would assume, and I've heard your story only once, that you were by yourself. I mean, that adds a whole nother dimension to it, doesn't it?
Yeah, at first I was by myself, and they heard, there's a fight on the beach, and as we did back then, we're talking 2005, you run along to the fight. That's what we did in high school. That's what we did. We watched the fight. We're a violent society. We love our blood sports, and they ran down to the beach to watch it, and I can understand them not stepping in, because apparently, from what I've heard, there were weapons. One of the guys was carrying a knife. But it's the after the fact, when I wanted to, get justice for this, these guys said they weren't there, or they didn't see it, or didn't want to get involved. And that's the hardest part of it all. It is really hard when your friends abandon you, and I struggle with relationships. I struggle with letting people in. I have trust issues. Like you've heard in my story, my marriage fell apart because I felt worthless and undeserving. And I found doing a treatment called EMDR that we're digging it back to this event when we're unlocking the memory.
It's funny when you talk about EDMR, because I had that same treatment and it did not work. In fact, I ended up standing on the chair with my fists because the thing was too confronting. It was one of my triggers is I see flashes in the corner of my eye, and one of the psychs once said they think that is my stylized memory of a knife coming towards my face. So when the person was doing the treatment with the wiggling fingers, they were too close to my face. So it's always funny to me when you hear somebody exactly the same diagnosis and the exact same treatment doesn't work for each person. Now, Brock, I need to ask you, because you are not a person that lives a life of victimhood. You are not a person that, you've shared these experiences in a way that I'd not heard about today, about the extenuating circumstances around your trauma. But, mate, you have the courage to stand up in front of people and expose this trauma to people. Where do you think that courage comes from?
That's a very good question, Mark. So in 2019, I was I'd been avoiding, and I actually attempted to take my own life. And I decided, I didn't decide. My family pushed me to go and get help. So I went into hospital for a couple of weeks, into a private clinic, and got my medication right, learned how to manage my treatment. And I remember I was in Newcastle, staying up there with family, doing the EMDR treatment, as we talked about. And I was actually at a Newcastle Jets games with my mates, and it was just having that matehood around, my mates around me that these are friends that I met after the traumatic events who are there for me, and we're all really close. And I felt alone when I attempted to take my own life, and I wanted to tell people they're not alone. So I actually went on Seek Volunteer, and that's when I found Mental Illness Education ACT. We're looking for lived experience people. So I filled out the form, and they called me, and I said, look, this is the situation. Then COVID happened. And
wasn't that one?
And then after COVID, I come in and did the training, and I will say Mental Health Education ACT, if it wasn't for them, I wouldn't have the story the way I have it, and I wouldn't be able to share it as much as I do. And I target that toxic masculinity environment because I was told to harden up and have a cup of concrete. And I was called by people who thought it was funny, ringing me up to say they're going to bash me again, or I was a murderer after the car accident. I had a phone call once from the person's friends saying that I was a murderer, and that stuff kind of hurts.
Kind of hurts? I mean, that's gut-wrenching, mate. I can't believe that stuff happened to you.
It was mid-2000s, mate, the noughties. Very, very different time. Mental health was not in the priority area as it is today, and it wasn't as known and developed, Yeah. So it was a different time frame, and I'm sure, you're a different generation to me. It would have been worse in your time for you as well. Growing up, our generations where boys don't cry, don't show anger. And now we spread the word that these are okay. These are okay emotions because they're on the emotion wheels, and we need to learn that.
Yeah, in my day, I worked in a really violent job. I worked with people with mental illness, diminished capacity, disabilities. And because I was a man and because I looked strong, I always seemed to end up working with the most violent people. Very small amount of people in that world that are violent, but I seem to work with every single one of them. And whenever you'd have a staff member that just wouldn't show up one day, maybe they got beat up or maybe something happened, we would not think to say, man, are they okay? We would make fun of them. And I am desperately ashamed that I did that to people. Now, we're going to, in a couple of seconds, play a song. But before we go to that, I just want to ask you one more question along the lines of, when you speak at MEACT, or Mental Illness Education ACT, they have this thing that's called Do No Harm. And you and I have both been through that. Part of it, I found, and probably the most important part for Do No Harm, is the fact that whenever I tell my story, I'm not harming myself. How does that work for you? Do you see that as being something that you're able to tell your story in a healthy way, that you're not re-traumatizing yourself?
When I follow the Do No Harm framework, yes. I will admit I did a story earlier this year where I was going through a bit of a rough patch in my life, and I was talking about damaging relationships, and I just damaged one, pulled one apart, and pretty much self-destructed, and that re-triggered me, and that was a really, really hard time. But other than that, whenever I do my story following the Do No Harm framework, I know what I'm talking about. I know it's not going to harm me, so I make sure I'm sharing in a safe space.
Because I'm actually getting texts, people that are asking if we're okay today. I've got 2 texts from people, and I just want to assure them that you and I we're storytellers. We do this in a volunteer capacity, but we're trained. So we aren't re-traumatizing ourselves.
No, we're not.
We're not. We are going to play a song right now. This is a bit of a different one for me. It comes out the gate pretty hard, but it's called Red Cold River. It's by a band called Breaking Benjamin, and it has in the chorus, I want you to listen to it. It's almost somebody talking to themselves. They're saying what the reality is, and then they're saying what they're hoping for. It is Breaking Benjamin. The song is Red Cold River. You are listening to 2XX.
You're listening to 2XX FM, People Powered Radio.
If any of the stories you've heard today have affected you in any way, remember the most courageous thing to do is to reach out for help. The great people at Lifeline are available anytime on 13 11 14. Welcome back. This is me and you. I'm here with Brock, and mate, this time I'm going to ask you a question, and I've actually got it lined up. All right, mate. In all of our mental health journeys, we've all heard something that has made us go, mate, what's something that has made you go,
Great question. Well, I remember, and you've heard this one when I was diagnosed by my GP. My mother was next to me, and her first response was, "But he's not military." And that basically took down that myth straight away. We always say, you got to see war trauma or something like traumatic events in war, or first responders. They're the only ones who get PTSD. I hear that all the time. I've never been in the army. I've never been a first responder. Anyone can have PTSD. I have met all walks of life living with PTSD, bipolar, whatever. People are living with it. And that makes me go, a lot, that people will just put us in that box, in that pile, or they think we're crazy. That's the other thing. We manage our mental health. We manage it well. There are times where I go down, yes, but I do get back up.
Well, and most of your life is up. We talk about having those dips, and I've had them as well. Last year, one of my medications just stopped working. It had kept me stable for 5 years. Then all of a sudden, it just wasn't working. And one of the things that happened in that time is I'd forgotten how bad it could actually be. I'd gotten so used to living well that when I went back, when I had that, I guess, regression. What is it? Not a relapse, because that meant almost like a choice. What is it when something comes back, like when cancer comes back? What do they call that?
It's
like that. It's I forgot how painful it actually was, because you forget. So I have to ask, when you're in that room, when I first got my diagnosis, I was actually really happy. That was a good day for me, because I'd gone for weeks and weeks and weeks thinking that maybe I was making this stuff up. What was your experience having somebody right next to you going, but he can't have PTSD? I mean, that would have made it much harder.
Yeah. Well, I just felt like the boxer on the floor for the 10 count, really.
Yeah.
I'd just been at work, and that's where people noticed I was different. They're like, Brock's not his happy self today. What's going on? He's throwing things around. I was working in a supermarket at the time, and I was basically just throwing boxes and not caring and swearing my head off, and I was not myself. And getting up there and them saying, this is what it is, I was like, wow. And the same thing, like, I was avoiding it. I thought I was crazy. I thought, this is not me. I have to get over this very quickly. And, like, for months I'd been hiding in my room. A car would go up the street and I'd hear an exhaust, and I would hide myself because I thought it was the guys who assaulted me coming back to get me again.
Yeah.
Or just the hypervigilance, walking down the street, looking over my shoulder. I couldn't go anywhere without sitting in the corner. And I didn't know what was wrong with me. And then getting this diagnosis and getting actually a qualified medical person telling me that this is normal, I was like, oh, wow.
Yeah.
And like I said, all my friends told me to harden up, have a cup of concrete, get over it.
Yeah.
Just get over it was one of the things that I remember drinking one night, and I was at my friend's house, and his sibling was like, just get over it, Brock. Just get over it. It happened. You got bashed. So what? People get bashed all the time. It's all in your head. But I don't think they understood how severe the beating was. And, like, there were events after that. Like, sometimes going into a hospital, I can be re-traumatized because after the assault, I spent the night in the hospital. And then when I was in the car accident, I was in there for 2 weeks. I, had a broken wrist and a shattered kneecap, so I had to learn how to use crutches.
Yeah.
And that can be quite traumatic for me, hospitals.
Yeah. I had an experience with the just get over it as well. The person that asked me, I still believe they deserve a punching to this day. It gutted me when they said that. Just the minimizing my symptoms by that statement. All right. we've got to turn the tables because we have gone hard today. And we've gone deep, and I appreciate that about you, Brock, that you and I can sit and have this conversation, because I've tried to have conversations like this with people in my family and, people around me, and it just doesn't work. But I cannot leave with this sense of doom and gloom that people are listening to an oral car accident. Mate, I need to know what keeps you going. I need to know why it is that whenever I see you at MEACT, when I see you at an event, I see a man full of hope. I see a man full of purpose. I don't see somebody that is broken. Talk to me about that, mate. How is it that you are the way that you are?
Yeah, people ask this a lot. They're like, how are you still going? What keeps you going? I've had people say to me, how are you still alive?
Yep.
How have you just not lied down and given up? But I have that resilience where I get back up. I have a tattoo on my wrist that says focus with a semicolon. That's for me to remind myself to focus, to get better. I have a tattoo ad victoriam, which means 4 to victory, that playing way too much Fallout 4, of course. But I have them to keep me going. I have Bluey tattoos on my leg, and they're there to remind me of my family. So I have Uncle Stripe, who's Bluey's uncle. He's a bit of a party animal. I'm the party animal out of my my 2 brothers and myself. And then I have Bandit, and the Bandit one, it's for my daughter. I'm a father, and she's turning 8 this year, and the last thing I want her to do is to grow up without me. And she keeps me going. Yeah. She's the one that keeps me going the most. She holds me accountable. I don't need a relationship. I don't need any of that. My daughter gives me hope and strength. And I hope that she grows up in a world where mental health stigma is gone. But when there are things go, I have self-care routine. I go to the gym, I work out. I've just got myself a dog to go for walks with. I've got a cat named Pinky. He's a bit of a jerk, but he somehow keeps me going sometimes. My family keep me going. I have nephews and nieces as well. They keep me going. That's where Uncle Stripe comes in.
Thank you for listening to Mark My Words. I'd like to thank my producer, Meredith Brosnan, and also Torian, Kevin, and Lorraine. And I can't forget the band Adelaide, who allows us to use their song as our theme.